Risk is everywhere, and companies need to manage their risk in order to protect and safeguard their assets. Now, risk needs to be managed, and there's a process to manage risk. And it comes in 4 steps. Number 1 is identification of risk. The second point is the assessment of that risk. Third point is the strategy to mitigate that risk. And the fourth point is, of course, to monitor. It goes on and on all the time because risk is dynamic. So the first point is you have to identify the risk. Every company identifies their risks. And risk could be thousands for thousands. So companies need to break them down and maybe categorize them when there's so many. For example, financial risk. It could be something on a currency exchange, something on having cash flow, liquidity. So you have various financial risks. So companies categorize them. Now there is reputation risk, could be operational risk, could be manufacturing risk. So there's a lot of risks and they need to be categorized. There's no right and wrong way here. There is no book that says every risk should be categorized this way. It's up to the company on how to decide on how they categorize their risk. They put it under certain brackets. But the first point is to identify it and put it under these categories. That would help you manage it better. The second point is to assess it. And as you can see in the slide, there's a 2x2 matrix which has to do with the likelihood of something happening and the impact it would have. If it's high likelihood, high impact, or low likelihood and low impact, you plot these categories or these specific risks into this 2x2 matrix, and many companies call it a heat map, okay? Because it shows where most heat is, with the highest risk, let's say. So you plot them into this map, and we all know that in many cases risk cannot be quantified. And if it cannot be quantified, it actually is a bit subjective. So you have to make sure that you agree when there's a real company at stake, of course, not something that you have in a case study, but some risks are correlated with others and some risk can affect another risk. So you have to know that it's like a domino effect sometimes. So financial risk, for example, can create reputational risk for the company. And reputation risk, of course, has other risks. So you have to understand that there's some correlating factors when you think about how to assess them in this heat map. The third point is to try to find a strategy to each and every one of these risks, okay? And the strategy is mitigating the risk. How are you going to mitigate the risk? So you can actually use the TARA methodology. TARA would mean transfer, avoid, reduce, or accept. So in each and every one of these risks that you have identified, plotted into the heat map, you can do one of 4 things. You can transfer, you can avoid, you can reduce, or you can accept. What does transfer mean? It means sharing the risk. You can actually insure that risk. What does avoiding it mean? Not taking the risk. What about reducing it? You can pay, you can invest more to mitigate the possibility of that risk happening. And finally, you can just accept it and say, I don't care, I don't mind, I would accept that risk. So you have to have a strategy for that. And finally, you have to monitor risk. And this all depends, of course, on the fact that, risks are dynamic and they change all the time. And therefore, you have to follow risk and the whole change of the possibility of one risk being a low likelihood to a higher likelihood. So that's why companies do this on an ongoing process. And you need to also try to know the risk appetite of the company, which has to do with how hungry the company is in taking risk, because the strategy will depend on the risk appetite.